Most of the tension you carry does not come from the world itself. It comes from the way your mind reacts to it. Life presents pressure, uncertainty, delay, and friction. That has always been true. What has changed is how relentlessly the modern mind responds to these conditions. Thoughts multiply. Reactions speed up. Emotional responses become constant instead of deliberate. When the mind lacks structure, even small disturbances feel heavy. A delay becomes agitation. Uncertainty turns into anxiety. Discomfort feels threatening rather than informative. Over time, the mind begins to exhaust itself, not because life is unbearable, but because every moment is processed as a problem. This is where most suffering quietly begins. Not in circumstances, but in interpretation. Not in events, but in judgments. Not in what happens, but in what the mind insists must mean something negative, urgent, or personal. Stoic philosophy approaches this issue with unusual clarity. It does not promise control over life. It does not suggest escape from difficulty. Instead, it teaches something far more practical: how to govern the part of you that decides what everything means. When that inner governance is stable, many problems lose their weight. They still exist, but they no longer dominate your inner state. The phrase, "fixing your problems," often sounds unrealistic. Life does not suddenly become smooth. Challenges do not disappear. What changes is the internal resistance added on top of reality. When the mind stops creating excess friction, most problems shrink to their actual size. This is the quiet power behind Stoic discipline. It does not eliminate struggle. It removes unnecessary suffering. And when that happens, clarity replaces noise, steadiness replaces reaction, and strength replaces overwhelm. To understand this shift, attention must move inward. Not to analyze endlessly, but to observe with discipline. That is where mental freedom begins. Stoicism is often misunderstood as emotional suppression or detachment from life. In truth, it is a philosophy of precision. It trains the mind to respond accurately instead of impulsively. It focuses on clarity, responsibility, and internal order. Marcus Aurelius expressed this discipline with striking simplicity when he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This statement is not motivational. It is instructional. It draws a clear boundary between what belongs to you and what does not. The Stoics believe that peace emerges when this boundary is respected consistently. When it is ignored, mental conflict follows. In modern terms, this philosophy aligns closely with what psychology confirms. Emotional instability is rarely caused by events alone. It is shaped by interpretation, expectation, and internal dialogue. Stoicism addresses these processes directly, without abstraction or mysticism. What gives Stoicism lasting relevance is its restraint. It does not exaggerate human potential. It does not deny emotion. It teaches regulation rather than avoidance. The goal is not to feel nothing, but to feel accurately and act deliberately. This framework matters because mental overload has become normalized. Constant reaction is mistaken for awareness. Emotional expression is confused with emotional mastery. Stoicism corrects this confusion by returning authority to the individual mind. The lessons that follow are not ideas to admire. They are principles meant to be practiced internally. Each one addresses a specific source of unnecessary mental strain and replaces it with stability. This narration is structured around 10 Stoic lessons. Each lesson addresses a different pressure point within the mind. Together, they form a system rather than isolated advice. These principles are not designed to make life easier on the surface. They are designed to make your inner state more reliable. When the inner state is stable, decision-making improves. Emotional reactions slow down. Attention sharpens. Energy is preserved. Each lesson builds on the previous one. None of them stand alone. The sequence matters because mental discipline develops through alignment, not accumulation. The goal is not to memorize ideas, but to reshape how you interpret, prioritize, and respond. Staying with this process until the end matters. Not because the final lesson is more important, but because integration changes impact. Understanding isolated principles creates insight. Understanding how they work together creates strength. As these lessons unfold, the emphasis will remain on clarity rather than intensity. Nothing here requires belief. It requires attention. The work happens internally, through recognition and adjustment. With that in mind, the first lesson begins where nearly all mental strain originates: confusion about control. Control what is yours, release what is not. Most mental distress arises from misdirected control. The mind attempts to manage outcomes, reactions of others, timing, and uncertainty. When reality does not comply, tension forms. This tension is not produced by events themselves, but by the demand that events should behave differently. Stoicism begins by drawing a firm distinction. Some things are within your control, and some are not. This is not a philosophical abstraction. It is a functional division meant to preserve mental energy. What belongs to you is internal. Judgment, intention, effort, restraint, and response fall within your authority. What does not belong to you includes outcomes, external approval, other people's choices, and the pace at which events unfold. When the mind reverses this order, instability follows. Energy is spent on resistance rather than direction. Frustration increases because control is attempted where none exists. At the same time, internal discipline weakens because attention is misplaced. Stoic reasoning restores balance by narrowing focus. Control is treated as a responsibility, not a privilege. When attention remains within its proper domain, effort becomes effective rather than exhausting. Mastering this principle stabilizes the mind because it reduces internal conflict. There is less argument with reality. Less negotiation with uncertainty. Less emotional escalation over conditions that cannot be altered. The internal shift here is subtle but powerful. Instead of asking how to force outcomes, the mind asks how to govern response. This shift does not reduce ambition. It refines it. Energy moves from frustration to precision. When control is respected correctly, pressure decreases without passivity. Action becomes deliberate rather than reactive. This is the foundation upon which all other Stoic discipline rests. Your emotional state is your responsibility. Many people experience emotions as if they arrive uninvited. Anger, anxiety, resentment, and insecurity are treated as external forces. Stoicism rejects this view. It recognizes emotion as a response shaped by interpretation. Emotions do not exist independently of thought. They are produced when the mind assigns meaning to perception. This does not imply blame. It implies responsibility. And responsibility restores agency. Stoic philosophy does not demand suppression. It demands awareness. When emotions are observed rather than indulged, they lose the ability to dominate behavior. The mind creates space between stimulus and reaction. In that space, choice becomes possible. This principle matters because emotional reactivity drains energy. It disrupts judgment. It creates instability in relationships and decision-making. When emotions dictate action, consistency disappears. Stoicism reframes emotional mastery as internal leadership. The mind becomes a steward rather than a battleground. Feelings are acknowledged without surrendering authority to them. The psychological root of emotional volatility lies in unconscious interpretation. When meanings are assumed automatically, emotions escalate quickly. When meanings are examined, emotional intensity reduces. The internal shift here involves recognizing emotion as information rather than instruction. Feelings signal internal states, but they do not command behavior. When this distinction becomes clear, emotional balance strengthens naturally. Taking responsibility for emotional state does not remove sensitivity. It removes helplessness. It restores the ability to remain steady under pressure without becoming detached or indifferent. This steadiness becomes essential as expectations enter the picture, which is where the next lesson begins. Expectations create unnecessary suffering. A significant portion of mental distress originates from expectation rather than reality. The mind quietly constructs assumptions about how situations should unfold, how others should behave, and how progress should appear. When reality diverges from these assumptions, disappointment follows. Stoic philosophy treats expectations as a source of self-inflicted strain. Not because hope is harmful, but because unexamined expectation attaches emotional outcomes to external conditions. When this attachment forms, inner stability becomes dependent on variables that cannot be guaranteed. Psychologically, expectation functions as a prediction charged with emotional investment. The stronger the investment, the stronger the reaction when the prediction fails. This creates a cycle where anticipation magnifies frustration rather than preparing the mind for adjustment. Stoic reasoning dissolves this cycle by replacing expectation with observation. Instead of projecting internal narratives onto events, the mind is trained to perceive conditions as they are. This shift does not remove intention or standards. It removes entitlement to specific outcomes. When expectations dominate perception, attention narrows. Judgment becomes rigid. The mind interprets deviation as failure rather than information. This rigidity increases resistance and drains emotional energy. Mastery of this principle stabilizes the inner state because it restores neutrality. Without expectation distorting perception, reality can be engaged directly. Decisions become adaptive rather than reactive. Emotional responses become proportionate rather than exaggerated. The reflective shift here involves releasing the belief that inner peace depends on external alignment. When this belief weakens, mental flexibility increases. Disappointment loses its sharpness because it is no longer fueled by imagined entitlement. By loosening expectation, the mind regains clarity. This clarity supports resilience and prepares the ground for engaging difficulty without emotional collapse. That leads directly into the role of discomfort. Discomfort is a training signal, not a threat. Modern thinking often treats discomfort as something to be avoided. Mental resistance forms quickly when effort, uncertainty, or tension appears. Stoic philosophy challenges this reflex by reframing discomfort as a signal rather than a danger. Discomfort indicates friction between current capacity and present demand. It reveals areas where growth is possible. When this signal is ignored or resisted, adaptation slows. When it is understood, resilience develops. Psychologically, avoidance strengthens sensitivity. The more the mind flees discomfort, the more reactive it becomes. Stoicism counters this pattern by encouraging measured exposure to difficulty without dramatization. This approach does not glorify suffering. It recognizes that comfort preserves current limits, while challenge expands them. When discomfort is interpreted accurately, it becomes informative rather than intimidating. The Stoic view emphasizes voluntary engagement with difficulty. This engagement builds familiarity. Familiarity reduces fear. Over time, the nervous system recalibrates. Pressure no longer triggers immediate withdrawal. Mastering this principle changes inner stability because it alters the mind's relationship with effort. Difficulty no longer signals danger. It signals training. Resistance decreases, and persistence increases. The internal shift here involves choosing engagement over avoidance. This choice strengthens discipline without aggression. It builds confidence through consistency rather than intensity. When discomfort is integrated correctly, mental strength becomes durable. This durability prepares the mind to confront one of its most exhausting tendencies, unnecessary imagination. The mind suffers more in anticipation than in reality. The mind has a natural tendency to project forward. It evaluates, predicts, and prepares. This ability is useful when disciplined. When undisciplined, it becomes a source of continuous strain. Stoicism identifies unnecessary anticipation as a major contributor to anxiety. The mind generates future-oriented tension without sufficient grounding in present information. This tension accumulates and distorts perception. Psychologically, anticipation activates emotional responses without corresponding action. The body reacts as if threat is imminent, while the situation remains unresolved. This mismatch creates fatigue and mental noise. Stoic reasoning addresses this by separating what is known from what is imagined. When this separation weakens, imagined outcomes acquire emotional weight equal to actual events. When it strengthens, emotional intensity decreases. Mastering this principle stabilizes the mind because it anchors attention in reality. Mental energy is conserved. Clarity improves. Decision-making becomes responsive instead of defensive. The reflective shift involves recognizing when the mind is operating ahead of evidence. Awareness interrupts escalation. Thought slows. Emotional pressure eases. This does not eliminate planning. It removes mental overextension. The mind remains prepared without becoming consumed. As anticipation quiets, another capacity becomes available: silence. This capacity governs reaction, communication, and presence. Silence is a form of inner strength. Silence is often misunderstood as passivity. Stoic philosophy treats it as restraint. Restraint is not weakness. It is controlled power. Psychologically, immediate reaction provides temporary release but weakens long-term stability. Each impulsive response reinforces reactivity. Silence interrupts this pattern by creating space for judgment. Stoicism values silence because it preserves internal authority. When the mind refrains from immediate expression, it retains choice. This choice protects emotional equilibrium and prevents unnecessary escalation. Silence also functions as an internal filter. It allows evaluation to occur before commitment. When expression is delayed, clarity improves. Words align more closely with intention. Mastery of this principle stabilizes relationships and self-respect. Emotional energy is conserved rather than expended impulsively. The mind remains centered rather than pulled outward. The internal shift here involves understanding that not every impulse requires expression. Not every stimulus demands response. When this understanding settles, composure strengthens naturally. Silence, used correctly, sharpens perception. It allows the mind to observe rather than react. This observation supports discernment, which is essential when interpreting the behavior of others. That discernment leads directly to the next principle: detachment from personal interpretation. Do not take things personally. Taking things personally is one of the fastest ways to destabilize the mind. When events, words, or behavior are interpreted as direct reflections of personal value, emotional balance becomes fragile. Stoic philosophy identifies this habit as a form of misplaced self-reference. Psychologically, personalization occurs when the mind assumes intentional meaning behind external behavior. This assumption often lacks verification, yet it carries emotional weight. The result is unnecessary self-judgment and heightened sensitivity. Stoicism challenges this pattern by separating identity from interpretation. External behavior originates from countless variables that are not governed by your internal worth. When the mind fuses the two, inner stability erodes. Mastering this principle strengthens mental resilience because it restores proportion. Emotional responses become measured rather than automatic. Self-respect becomes internally sourced rather than externally negotiated. The Stoic approach does not dismiss accountability or awareness. It refines perception. The mind observes without absorbing. It evaluates without internalizing. This distance preserves clarity. The internal shift here involves recognizing that personal meaning is often projected rather than confirmed. When projection decreases, emotional reactivity weakens. Mental steadiness increases. Detachment, in this sense, is not coldness. It is accuracy. It prevents the mind from assigning ownership to what does not belong to it. As this accuracy develops, emotional energy is conserved. That energy can then be redirected toward growth rather than defense. This prepares the mind to reinterpret resistance itself. The obstacle is not separate from the path. Resistance often triggers frustration because it is perceived as interference. The mind treats difficulty as something that disrupts progress rather than something that shapes it. Stoic philosophy rejects this division. According to Stoic reasoning, resistance reveals structure. It exposes limits, weaknesses, and misalignment. When approached correctly, it becomes instructive rather than obstructive. Psychologically, resistance activates appraisal systems within the mind. When interpreted as punishment, it creates withdrawal. When interpreted as information, it creates adaptation. Stoicism reframes obstacles as necessary pressure points. Without pressure, development stagnates. The mind grows not by avoidance, but by adjustment. Mastery of this principle stabilizes the inner state because it removes opposition to reality. The mind stops negotiating with difficulty and starts working within it. This reduces internal conflict. The reflective shift here involves accepting resistance as a signal of engagement rather than failure. Acceptance does not imply passivity. It allows intelligent response. When obstacles are no longer treated as enemies, emotional tension decreases. Focus increases. Persistence becomes sustainable. This alignment prepares the mind for a broader perspective. One that includes the finite nature of time itself. Awareness of mortality sharpens judgment. Stoic philosophy treats awareness of mortality as a clarifying force. When time is perceived as abundant, priorities blur. When time is recognized as limited, attention sharpens. Psychologically, avoidance of mortality creates procrastination and emotional delay. Decisions are deferred. Boundaries weaken. Energy disperses. Stoicism counters this tendency by encouraging conscious awareness of finitude. This awareness is not morbid. It is directive. It brings urgency without panic. Mastering this principle stabilizes the mind by reducing trivial attachment. Concerns that once felt overwhelming lose significance. Focus shifts toward alignment and intention. The internal shift here involves treating time as a resource rather than an assumption. When this shift occurs, action becomes deliberate. Regret decreases because awareness guides choice. This perspective strengthens mental discipline. It simplifies decision-making. It removes excess hesitation. As judgment sharpens, attention returns to values rather than distraction. This sets the stage for the final principle, which unifies all others. Character must come before approval. Approval is unstable by nature. It fluctuates with perception, mood, and circumstance. When identity depends on it, inner stability becomes vulnerable. Stoic philosophy places character above recognition. Character represents internal consistency. It does not rely on validation. It endures regardless of response. Psychologically, approval-seeking externalizes self-worth. Emotional security becomes dependent on conditions beyond control. This dependence increases anxiety and weakens resolve. Mastering this principle stabilizes the mind because it returns authority inward. Decisions align with values rather than reaction. Integrity replaces negotiation. The internal shift here involves prioritizing coherence over acceptance. When actions match principles, self-respect strengthens. Emotional volatility decur. Ases. This does not remove social awareness. It removes dependence. The mind remains open without becoming submissive. Character-centered living integrates discipline, clarity, restraint, and purpose. It forms the backbone of Stoic practice. When character leads, peace follows naturally. This completes the framework and prepares the ground for integration. The mind as a unified system. When these 10 principles are viewed individually, they offer relief. When they are understood together, they create transformation. Stoicism does not function as isolated advice. It functions as an internal system. Each principle supports the others by stabilizing a different layer of the mind. Control clarifies where effort belongs. Emotional responsibility restores agency. Releasing expectation removes friction. Accepting discomfort builds capacity. Reducing unnecessary anticipation quiets anxiety. Silence preserves authority. Detachment protects self-worth. Resistance becomes direction. Awareness of mortality sharpens focus. Character anchors identity. When these elements align, the mind stops operating in conflict with itself. Internal arguments soften. Reactions slow. Attention becomes deliberate rather than scattered. This is where the perception of problems changes. Most difficulties do not vanish. What vanishes is excess resistance. The strain created by interpretation, urgency, entitlement, and fear begins to dissolve. Without that added pressure, challenges return to their actual size. This is why Stoic discipline appears quiet from the outside. The work happens internally. It is subtle but cumulative. Each correction removes a small distortion. Over time, clarity compounds. At this point, the mind no longer chases calm. It maintains stability. Peace stops being a mood and becomes a condition. Not because circumstances improve, but because interpretation becomes accurate. This is the moment where many realize something important. Strength does not arrive through force. It arrives through order. When thoughts align with reality instead of resisting it, energy returns. Focus sharpens. Emotional resilience stabilizes. This is the essence of mastering the mind. Not domination. Not denial. Alignment. The internal system is now complete. What remains is maintenance. That maintenance is not dramatic. It is consistent. And that consistency is what allows clarity to endure. Mental alignment does not occur instantly. It develops through repeated correction. Each time attention returns to what is controllable, alignment strengthens. Each time reaction is delayed, stability increases. Stoic discipline emphasizes awareness over force. The mind is trained through observation, not pressure. When awareness becomes habitual, correction becomes automatic. This process requires patience. The mind resists change when identity is attached to reaction. Over time, that attachment loosens. Emotional charge decreases. Responses become measured. Consistency matters more than intensity. Alignment forms when principles are applied evenly, not aggressively. This creates reliability. Reliability creates confidence. Responsibility remains central throughout this process. The Stoic does not outsource emotional stability. The mind remains accountable for interpretation, restraint, and intention. As alignment deepens, external noise loses influence. Opinions, delays, and unpredictability stop commanding attention. The internal state becomes less dependent on conditions. This stability is not rigidity. It is adaptability. The mind remains flexible without becoming reactive. Firm without becoming closed. Over time, alignment simplifies decision-making. When values are clear, hesitation reduces. Energy is conserved. Direction sharpens. This is how mental discipline becomes sustainable. Not through pressure, but through structure. Stoic philosophy does not rely on external tools, but certain practices can support reflection and awareness. These tools are not solutions. They are supports for attention. Reflection strengthens awareness by slowing thought. Writing clarifies interpretation by externalizing judgment. Reading classical texts reinforces principles by repetition. These supports function best when used lightly. Over-reliance creates dependency. The goal remains internal clarity, not external structure. The Stoic mind does not collect techniques. It refines perception. Tools serve that purpose only when used deliberately. When attention remains primary, supports remain optional. These 10 lessons point toward one conclusion. Life becomes more manageable when the mind becomes accurate. Not optimistic. Not hardened. Accurate. Most suffering dissolves when interpretation aligns with reality. When reaction slows. When effort is placed where it belongs. When character replaces approval. This is not about perfection. It is about consistency. Each moment of clarity strengthens the next. Remember this. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you train. The work is internal, quiet, and cumulative. But it changes everything. Before you move on, consider this one question. Which principle, if practiced consistently, would restore the most clarity to your life? If this reflection resonated, share your thoughts below. Join the conversation. Subscribe if you want to continue strengthening the mind through discipline, clarity, and Stoic reasoning. You are not alone in this practice. And the work, done patiently, always returns strength.